All right. Looked right at that light. You can go ahead and start recording.
Is.
Oh. Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. Today's video, I thought I would go ahead and do a mini, well, not really mini, it's more of a comprehensive book tour of all of the books that we have accumulated. As you guys probably know, Dan and I recently moved to Illinois and we are in my mom's house, and she's been very kind in letting us sort of take over her living room with books. So we have these bookshelves behind me, we have a bookshelf right there, we have some in the hallway over there, and I thought it would be fun to just go ahead and go through the over 600 books that we do have and show you kind of the collection that we've accumulated these past 5 years. So the way that we've organized our books is actually by category. We found that for the books we have, that seems to work best rather than trying to do things alphabetically or by author. Now we do have a small section over here that we will get to that is by author, and that's just because we have a very large selection by those particular authors and we like to keep those together. But otherwise everything is sort of split up all over just based on the category of the book. Now, a lot of these are Dan's books that he's used for school for the past 5 years, and for those shelves, it'll actually be him explaining what they are, rather than me. Unlike a lot of these other bookshelf tours that you'll see on YouTube, a lot of the books that we have acquired are from secondhand stores and thrift stores, so they are not going to be in the best shape. If we have series of books, chances are they're not all gonna match each other, and we're okay with that. It's just not gonna be as aesthetically pleasing to look at. So if that really bothers you, I'm sorry in advance, but at least you don't have to look at them every day. All right, so the first set of shelves that we're going to tackle are these two that are sort of tucked away in the corner in the hallway, so not with the main set of books. All right, so looking at the top shelf, it is completely empty. We don't quite have stuff to put up there yet, but I might put some decorative pieces up there until we get it filled up entirely. The next shelf down, we have sort of nature-related books. So we have a book completely on owls, we have some general science, all about the stars, and we also have books on Darwin and Stephen Hawking. So books on birds and trees and reptiles and amphibians, and then right over here, we have one on different dog breeds. And then Dan has his binder of mostly football cards with some baseball cards mixed in there up here as well. And then we also have a lamp for just extra light when we need it, because this corner does tend to get pretty dark. The next shelf down is dedicated mostly to languages, and we have a whole section for German, whether it be dictionaries, like here and here, or different verbs, or actually novels written in German. We have this one that we haven't quite read yet, and then we have this one that I actually spent some time translating. It's called I Will Make You Well, Said the Bear, little children's book. And then we also have a Calvin and Hobbes comic that had been translated into German that we keep there. And moving over a little bit further, we have some Spanish. This is a Spanish dictionary. And then we have some Braille books. I actually did a whole video on learning Braille in a month, and so I have this book that is touch and feel and actually raised Braille. There is this little tray that helps you to feel and learn each letter by feeling it. And then I have this book that is learning Braille for sighted people, so there's actually nothing that's raised on there. And then again, I have this little toy that's a Braille learning tool that I just kind of stuck up there with those. And next over we have different books on writing and writing styles. And then I have these two books, the What to Expect When You're Expecting and The First Year. Both of these I had found at Goodwill. Didn't quite know what to do with them, so they're just kind of hanging out there for now. The next shelf down is dedicated to all of the murder mysteries that I like. Mostly here you will see Sue Grafton. She did a whole murder mystery series going each book for a different letter of the alphabet. So I have A, B, and C all in one large collection there, and then I have D all the way going over to W right here. She has released X and Y, but she actually passed away recently and never finished writing Z. So I will be on the lookout for X and Y, but unfortunately Z will never come. And then a little further over, we have a bunch of collections of Agatha Christie, and finally one Kathy Reichs book that is actually on my reading list for this year that I want to try to read before 2019 is over. Down to the next shelf, we have a small selection of young adult type intermediate books, I guess. I don't really know what you would call them fully. Some of them are more tween, some of them are just easier, simpler reads. We have To Be a Cat that we found at a thrift store that I thought it was very fun read. Then we have 2 of the Percy Jackson and the Olympians books. Both of these I have found at Goodwill, which is why I only have 1 and 5. Number 1 is again on my reading list this year that I hope to read before the end of 2019. And if I like them, I will be keeping a sharper eye out for the rest of the series. And we have a few Encyclopedia Brown holes. I have a couple of the Magic Treehouse series, which I remember really enjoying when I was younger. Anne of Green Gables. We have this fun Sesame Street book, all about the first 30 years of Sesame Street. And then moving over a little bit more, we have some of Dan's Packers related books. And then we start getting into our vast collection of comic strip books. This shelf here starts it off with all of our Dilbert books by Scott Adams. So we have large selections of them, smaller books, and actually full-length books that he has written. And moving down to this shelf, we have the rest of them. Starting over here, we have 2 large collections of New Yorker cartoons. We have a few Garfield, some Pogo, and this one's in a bag because the binding has completely fallen apart and we don't want to lose all of the pieces. And then we go a little further over, we have Peanuts, and we have some Foxtrot, we have Zits here, Pearls Before Swine, Get Fuzzy, and we have a large selection of The Far Side and a complete collection of The Far Side that I got for Dan for Christmas one year. Then we move over into Calvin and Hobbes. Again, we have lots of smaller books all about that, again with a full collection that we had gotten that we actually found at a thrift store one time for a very good price. Moving on to this shorter bookshelf beside it, we have a lot of different stuffed animals and things that we've collected. This is more of my craft shelf. So this top shelf is just different things that I've accumulated that I haven't quite found a place to put yet. And this next shelf down, again, is all of that. I have all sorts of notebooks and things for video ideas and writing and drawing. I have an entire basket of all of my miscellaneous electronics. I have all of my journals put together in one place, so if I need a specific one, I know right where to go. And then we start getting over into coloring books that are all over here for when I like to make some coloring book parodies. And I have all of my crayons and everything down there. And then a few extra journals and notebooks that I can reach for pretty easily. The next shelf down is just more craft things. I have some sewing projects in here that I'm working on. I have some nail polish back there. This is all just miscellaneous craft things. And this is for all of my scrapbooking things. I have all sorts of scrapbooking books back there. And the photo albums that I use to scrapbook in specifically, all there. And then this bottom shelf is dedicated to children's books that we have found throughout the years that we are collecting for whenever the day comes that we have children. So starting over here, we have some children's poetry. We have lots of Jack Perletsky and several duplicates of books because we find them at thrift stores and they're so good that we like to get the duplicates when we find them so we can give them to friends and family whenever they come over and say that they would like a copy. And then we have a children's version of Moby Dick. And a little further over, we have some of the If You Give a Mouse a Cookie books. And then we have a full collection of the Amelia Bedelia books, plus an individual one, followed by a lot of A.A. Milne's Winnie the Pooh. And going over a little further, we have the Paddington collections, and we have a few children's Bibles, illustrated Bibles here. Next to the children's Bibles, we have the Church Mice books, which are absolutely wonderful. These are fantastic books to get. They are very well written, very wonderfully illustrated, with just some wonderful detailed pictures that you can find all sorts of just great little gems in. And there's a whole series of these. We don't have all of them, but they're definitely ones if you see you will want to pick up. Then we have a whole collection of Richard Scarry books, a few Dr. Seuss, Curious George, a few Disney treasuries. We have a whole treasury of children's nursery rhymes, and then we get into all sorts of look-and finds of Where's Waldo. This is a little travel-sized one of all of the books combined, and then we also have some of the classic I Spies as well. Moving on to the short bookshelf in the dining room. The very top of it we are using as a display for all of these awesome rocks that we've collected, either ourselves or that Dan's dad has collected, and also this really cool little display piece of, it's glass. We don't really know what to call it. If you know the name of what these are, please let me know in the comments, because we couldn't figure out what the appropriate name for that is, but that's really cool. We got that from Dan's Gram and Gramps. This next shelf down we use as sort of a catch-all for the books and notebooks that we are reaching for currently and that we are pulling constantly throughout the day. This next shelf we have a whole bunch of different devotionals that we've collected, and we have some spiritual formation books and leadership books. And then we have a few of our little decorative pieces for the Packers. We have our Gumby and Pokey, and Mom has had to throw in her own Bears bear in the back to help even things out some. All right, in this bottom shelf we have, you can see there's a lot of different Bibles and Bible dictionaries, and we have a hymn book. And then these are all books that were really too big to fit anywhere else, and they sort of fall into the category of coffee table books, where they're just really fun to flip through. They have some really great illustrations in them, but we really didn't have another place to put them.
Here on this bookshelf, we have actually what just arrived in the mail today, a full-size Packers helmet. All Packers players who played during the Vince Lombardi eras and won the first 2 Super Bowls and football championships prior to that. So that's a very special one. And here's I would say equally special one, mini football helmet, signed by Jordy Nelson, a gift by my wife. Here we have most of my biblical studies books, beginning with books typically used for studying Hebrew of the Old Testament, and then we'll move into books that focus on intertestamental literature or religious books outside of the canons of the Old and New Testaments. These books these enormous monstrosities are books that help you study and navigate special words and where they're found throughout the entire book. This is the concordance to the Septuagint. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament. Here, if I open this up, all of these list each of the words, how many times it occurs, where it occurs with other words, and how many times it occurs in basically the entire Old Testament in Greek. And then moving on, here are the books that we focus on Greek exegesis, studying the Greek New Testament. Here's my biggest volume. It's an outdated volume, but you can get a pretty good picture of the Greek text and all of its commentary below it. So I have here principally the same tools that you use for studying Hebrew. So we'll have lexicons and grammars and books about textual criticism. That's when you study the actual handwritten manuscripts of the Bible. So moving on, we'll have some classical works like Xenophon and Josephus. Here is a oldie but a goodie, the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament. And it's a copious volume. It consists of Greek words and where it is that they're found for their Old Testament equivalents in the intertestamental literature and in the New Testament, and trying to understand it not just with how it's used, but its theology. Calvin's Institutes, which is huge, but I've been told very enriching. I actually haven't read through it yet, I need to. Here we have basically books on Christian worldview and ethics. So here we have, of course, the large works of Francis Schaeffer and other Christian thinkers, N.T. Wright and Timothy Keller and John R.W. Stott and Richard Bauckham. Gordon Conway got a hold of a lot of quality books on Bioethics and Sexual Ethics. Very well written, very accessible. I definitely highly recommend Unchanging Witness by Fortson and Grams and The Meaning of Sex by Dennis Hollinger. He's excellent. Basically, the Christian theology shelf. So whether we're talking about studying systematic theology or particular theological subjects like repentance or the kingdom of God, the work of Christ, the true image, pneumatology, ecclesiology, Holy Communion. I try to keep all of my theological books, whatever their focus is on, in the same spot. Now, it may seem a little odd, there's a witch book right next to it, but I frankly couldn't find any better place to put it, so I'm not studying my theology from that. You can be assured of that.
Moving on to our biggest bookshelf that we have. On the very top, we have this really cool, fun, old globe. And then we have this little bag that is supposed to help purify the air, and it just hangs out right up there. My cookbooks that I reference every once in a while. And then just a few miscellaneous, more beaten up books hanging out over there.
Here we have a collection focused on Bible study and hermeneutics. Hermeneutics, that's a fancy word for the art of interpretation. So lots of books devoted on not just exegeting the Bible, but also how to interpret it. So this is one of my personal favorites. It's not everyone's favorite, but I found it very useful. Gordon Fee's and Douglas Stewart's How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth. It's a very accessible volume, very useful in learning how to interpret the Bible well. Okay, next we'll be moving on to the subject of Christianity and world religions, the interreligious dialogue between religions like Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism or Judaism, and these are very useful resources. Moving on here, we have pretty much all the books that are devoted to Old Testament studies. Not necessarily Hebrew specifically, but just the Old Testament. You have Old Testament survey books, some about Old Testament theology, and then moving on to some more specific ones with commentaries on particular books. So this is going to be on Psalms 1 through 50. This is all of Isaiah. This is some of the minor prophets, and then moving on closer to some other related Old Testament topics like archaeology or the Dead Sea Scrolls, the image of God in the Garden of Eden, written by one of my former professors, Catherine McDowell. Excellent teacher. And here we have books on New Testament studies, certain commentaries that are just about the books of the New Testament as a whole. So we have different survey ones. The InterVarsity Press dictionary series. I only have one of their editions, but this one it's an excellent resource filled with lots of useful articles. So Dictionary of Jesus and the Gospels is an excellent one. Moving on into commentaries, focusing on the Gospels, and then sandwiched between the different commentaries are some books about, particularly about Jesus and his ministry, or The Quest of the Historical Jesus, another classic. Cross of Christ, an excellent read. If there was ever any book alongside Mere Christianity that's a good starter for understanding one of the more central parts of Christian theology, The Cross of Christ is an excellent resource. Then moving on, we have some books about the transmission of the biblical text, particularly with eyewitness testimony of the Gospels. And then moving in to Pauline studies, Pauline theology, and commentaries on books written by the Apostle Paul, Romans, 1 Corinthians. Moving on to some other topics closely related to other New Testament studies. So Books and Readers in the Early Church is an excellent one by Gamble. New Testament and the People of God. Good books to help understand how it is that the early church handled the books of the Bible and how they understood them as a whole. Here begins some of the collections that we have of authors that are large enough that we want to keep them all together. So we're keeping all the Dietrich Bonhoeffer books together here that begin.
Jumping down to the next shelf, we are continuing those author groupings with George MacDonald and The Princess and the Goblin. Then jumping right into Tolkien, so we have Unfinished Tales, we have The Hobbit, one great big book of all of the Lord of the Rings trilogies, and then we have another copy of The Hobbit, well actually 2 more copies of The Hobbit, and a whole nother trilogy of the Lord of the Rings there. And then sandwiched between these 2 authors, we have a book of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis and their friendship. And naturally then, on the other side of that book, we have C.S. Lewis. So it starts off with the Chronicles of Narnia and the big book of all of those, followed by a box set, and then an incomplete set that we had gotten at a thrift store for a very good price, and they were in very, very good condition, so it was okay not getting the complete set. I know some of that might bother some of you a lot, but it's okay. And then some of Lewis's other classics, because it might come to a shock as to some of you, but he wrote more than just fantasy novels. He had a whole other collection of books, ranging a wide variety of topics, some of them space trilogies, but some of them on Christianity, heaven and hell, evil and suffering. And then we have a very large book of his signature classics all put into one book. And then moving over, we have the Harry Potter books. Again, all of these were found at a thrift store, which is why the Sorcerer's Stone does not match up with what the rest of them look like. I hope one day to find the Sorcerer's Stone that matches these, so this looks a little nicer. And then we also have Quidditch Through the Ages and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them in their little box set right there. On the next shelf, we have a small section dedicated to church history. And then moving on to a section of biographies that we have. So Alexander the Great, John Bunyan, D.L. Moody, Bonhoeffer again. We have one on John Cleese, Johnny Cash. And bridging the gap between the biographies and our humor section, we have Bob Newhart and Alan Alda. Have the little comedy section, so we have some Jim Gaffigan, we have Awkward Family Photos, the Babylon Bees, How to Be a Perfect Christian, good selection of Dave Barry, Monty Python. On the next shelf, right below the church history, we have just regular world history that bleeds right into the classic section that we have. And it starts off with things like Homer and Plato, and goes into this large selection we had found covering a multitude of classic authors. And the bottom shelf that just continues all of the classics, we have major British writers, William Shakespeare, some poetry. Going all the way over, we have Alice in Wonderland over there, Sherlock Holmes, Moby Dick, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Fahrenheit 451, which is a book that I want to read fairly soon. Alright, so that was our bookshelf tour. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Let me know if there's any books on these shelves that you would be interested in reading, and let me know if there's any books that you guys have read that you think we would be interested in reading based on kind of what you've seen we already have in our selection. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up if you have enjoyed it, and subscribe so you don't miss any new videos that I post. I make new videos every Wednesday and vlogs every Sunday. Have a great week, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye! All sorts of things. It's not funny.
It is a little bit. Close the door.
Maybe, actually. Thanks. Thanks.
Okay.
Teach him to do yard work while I'm filming.